Night shift at Washington General Hospital. A young doctor, hair tied back neatly, carefully stitching a wound on an unidentified patient. The door burst open. Professor Reynolds, chief of surgery, barked, "Who are you to touch this case? You don't have the seniority." She looked up calm. "I've been doing this for 15 years. He laughed mockingly. "Where? On YouTube?" The whole room erupted in laughter. But right then the door was kicked wide open. 3 CIA agents stepped in, black suits, badges gleaming. "Dr. Lara Hayes, we need you now. Code red." Nobody laughed anymore. Dr. Lara Hayes, 34 years old, a newly hired surgeon at Washington General Hospital with a modest background. She'd served as a military medic in Afghanistan, but never disclosed her full record. Chief Surgeon Reynolds, 55 years old, head surgeon, arrogant, believed that every great doctor must have prestigious credentials. Nurse Emily Tran, 29 years old, a loyal nurse, the only one who knew Lara had once been part of the SEAL medical operations. Lara arrived at the hospital with a simple resume, relocated intern from Europe. She was quiet, spoke little, focused only on her work. Washington General Hospital was known for its cutthroat competition, a place where reputation mattered more than ability. From day one, Reynolds didn't like her. "Someone like you should be handing out pills, not operating." But Lara always chose silence. During emergency cases, she often saved patients thought to be hopeless, with movements so fast and precise, it seemed she'd practiced them hundreds of times. One night, the hospital received a gunshot victim with no records. Reynolds was absent. She decided to operate immediately. When he returned, she'd already completed the surgery. The patient survived. He was furious. "You had no authority. You violated protocol." She only replied, "If I'd waited for protocol, he'd be dead." He laughed. "You think you're some battlefield hero?" Lara stayed silent, then said, "I once saw blood pooling across an entire tent, and my hands never shook." The statement hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Reynolds scoffed, but something in her eyes made him uncomfortable. There was a depth there, a darkness that came from seeing too much death. Over the following weeks, Lara continued her quiet work. She never argued, never defended herself, just saved lives. The other doctors whispered about her. Some admired her skill. Others called her reckless. Reynolds made sure everyone knew she was unproven. During a staff meeting, he publicly questioned her qualifications. Dr. Hayes claims 15 years of experience, but her resume shows only basic rotations. "Where exactly did you practice, doctor?" Lara looked at him evenly. "Field hospitals, war zones, places where you operate with mortars falling and no anesthesia." He smirked. "Convenient, no one can verify that." She didn't respond, just stood and left the room. That same evening, another critical case arrived. A diplomat's son, injured in a car accident, internal bleeding. Reynolds took charge, but his hands shook as he tried to locate the source. Lara stood in the observation deck, watching through the glass. Emily whispered to her, "He's going to lose him." Lara's jaw tightened. "The bleeder's in the mesenteric artery. He's looking in the wrong place. You should go down there." "He won't let me." But as the monitors began to scream and the patient's pressure dropped, Reynolds looked up at the observation window, desperate. Lara was already moving. She burst into the OR, didn't ask permission, just stepped beside him. "Clamp here. Suture there. Move." Her hands moved like lightning. 3 minutes. The bleeding stopped. The patient stabilized. Reynolds stepped back, breathing hard, staring at her. She removed her gloves calmly, said nothing, and walked out. The next morning, Reynolds called her into his office. "Dr. Hayes, you're suspended. This hospital doesn't need people who fake their credentials." Lara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Understood." She signed the paperwork without protest. As she walked toward the exit, carrying her small box of belongings, Emily caught up with her. "You're just going to let him do this?" Lara smiled faintly. "I've been dismissed by worse people, Emily. I'll survive." "But you saved that boy's life. And he'll live. That's all that matters." Emily watched her leave, feeling a strange ache in her chest. There was something profoundly sad about watching someone so skilled be cast aside. That evening, Emily found herself thinking about Lara's words. I once saw blood pooling across an entire tent. What kind of doctor says something like that? She pulled up Lara's file on the hospital database. Standard credentials, basic certifications. Nothing remarkable. But then she noticed something. A single line, almost hidden at the bottom. Former military service. Details classified. Emily's hands trembled as she closed the file. Nurse Emily later recalled, I saw Reynolds turn red, while Dr. Hayes just calmly removed her gloves and washed her hands. But when I looked into her eyes, there was something deeper, something haunting, like someone who'd seen far too much death. When the past gets pulled back, and the world discovers the person they underestimated once saved hundreds of lives. The next day should have been Lara's last at Washington General. She was cleaning out her locker when the alarm sounded. A massive explosion downtown. Dozens injured. Mass casualty event. The hospital descended into chaos. Reynolds was ordered to organize emergency surgical teams, but most of the senior surgeons were at a conference across town. Lara stood in the hallway, box still in her hands. Gurneys rushed past her, screaming patients, overwhelmed residents. She set down the box. Emily saw her and grabbed her arm. Lara, you can't. You're suspended. People are dying. Reynolds will have you arrested. Lara looked at the chaos unfolding before her. Then she stripped off her jacket and grabbed a pair of scrubs from a passing cart. Then he can arrest me after. She moved into the ER like a force of nature. First patient, chest trauma, collapsed lung. She inserted a chest tube in 90 seconds. Second patient, abdominal bleeding. She assessed, prioritized, sent him straight to OR2. Third patient, a child, barely breathing. She intubated without hesitation. The residents watched her in awe. Every movement precise. Every decision instant. No doubt, no hesitation. Reynolds arrived 20 minutes later, saw her working, and exploded. What the hell is she doing here? Security! But before anyone could respond, a gurney was rushed in. The patient was unconscious, bleeding heavily from the abdomen. Military haircut, black tactical watch. No identification. One of the paramedics whispered to Reynolds, Federal agent, found at the blast site. They said he's priority 1. Reynolds went pale. Get him to OR1, now. He scrubbed in, but as soon as he opened the patient, he froze. The damage was catastrophic. Shrapnel throughout the abdominal cavity, torn liver, possible aortic injury. His hands began to shake. I can't, he whispered. The anesthesiologist looked at him. Doctor? Reynolds stepped back. We need a specialist. From the doorway, Lara's voice cut through. 3-centimeter incision at the left quadrant. Don't touch the aorta. Reynolds spun around. You're suspended. She was already gloving up. Trust me or lose the patient. Your choice. For a moment, time stopped. Then Reynolds stepped aside. Lara moved to the table. Her eyes scanned the wound, assessing in seconds what Reynolds couldn't see. Retractor here. Suction. Clamp. Her hands moved with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. She isolated the bleeder, clamped it, sutured it, moved to the next, and the next. The room watched in absolute silence. 12 minutes later, the patient's heart rate stabilized. Reynolds stood frozen, staring at her. She didn't look at him, just continued working, repairing damage with mechanical efficiency. When she finally closed, she stepped back, stripped off her gloves, and said quietly, He'll need ICU monitoring. Watch for sepsis. Then she turned to leave, but the doors burst open. 2 men in dark suits, federal badges displayed, CIA. They looked directly at Lara. Dr. Hayes, we need you immediately. National security priority. The entire room fell silent. Reynolds found his voice. What is this? One of the agents looked at him coldly. Dr. Hayes is being requested for a classified medical emergency. She's coming with us now. Lara looked at Emily, gave her a small nod, then followed the agents out. Reynolds stood there, his world tilting. Emily stepped beside him, her voice quiet. You just suspended one of the most decorated combat surgeons in U.S. military history. He turned to her, confused. What? Her real name is Dr. Lara Hayes, former lead surgeon, Special Operations Medical Command. She operated in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, under fire. Without backup, she saved more lives than most surgeons see in their entire careers. Reynolds felt the blood drain from his face. Why? Why didn't she say anything? Emily looked at him with something close to pity. Because people like her don't need to prove themselves. They just do the work. Later that evening, Emily sat in the break room, replaying everything in her mind. Another nurse, Sandra, sat beside her. Is it true about Dr. Hayes? Emily nodded slowly. I looked her up. She was called the Angel of Kandahar. Soldiers said she could operate during mortar fire and never flinch. She saved a Black Hawk crew after they crashed behind enemy lines, performed field surgery with a penlight and basic supplies. Sandra shook her head in disbelief, and Reynolds suspended her. He didn't know. He didn't ask. The truth of that statement settled heavily between them. The patient Lara had saved, the federal agent, was moved to ICU under armed guard. Reynolds tried to visit him but was turned away. Classified case, doctor. You're not cleared. He went back to his office and sat in the dark for a long time. On his desk was the suspension paperwork he'd made Lara sign. He picked it up, read her signature, neat and steady. She hadn't argued, hadn't defended herself, just signed and walked away. Because she knew something he was only now beginning to understand. Her worth wasn't determined by his opinion. Emily later testified. When she walked out with those agents, her scrubs were still blood-stained, but her eyes were cold and steady, like she'd just stepped off a battlefield, not out of an operating room. That's when I knew we'd never really seen her, not the real her. When the true identity is unveiled and the person who was humiliated is revealed as the key to saving the nation. Lara was driven straight to Langley, no explanation, no small talk, just the hum of the car engine and the weight of what was coming. Inside the CIA Operations Center, a senior officer met her, Director Marcus Webb. Late 50s, gray hair, eyes that had seen too many crises. Dr. Hayes, thank you for coming. She nodded. What's the situation? We have an operative, critically wounded during an extraction in East Africa. He made it back, but barely. Bullet fragments lodged near his spine. If we don't operate in the next 6 hours, he'll be paralyzed or dead. Why me? Webb looked at her steadily. Because you're the only surgeon in the country with the specific training and field experience to handle this. The fragments are embedded in an area where one wrong move means instant death. We need someone who's operated under pressure, without perfect conditions and succeeded. Lara nodded. I'll need a team. You can pick anyone. She paused and then said, I want my team from Washington General, Nurse Emily Tran, and, she hesitated, Dr. Reynolds. Webb raised an eyebrow. The man who suspended you? He's skilled when he's not second-guessing himself, and I need hands I can trust. Within the hour, Emily and Reynolds were brought to Langley. Reynolds looked shaken, confused. Emily just looked determined. They were led into a secure medical facility, state-of-the-art equipment, armed guards at every door. Lara met them outside the OR. She was in full surgical gear now, but there was something different about her. More focused, more centered. Reynolds couldn't meet her eyes. Dr. Hayes, She cut him off gently. Later. Right now, we have a life to save. She led them into the briefing room, where scans of the patient were displayed on massive screens. The patient is Agent Marcus Cole, former Delta, now CIA field operative. He took 2 rounds during an extraction. One grazed his lung, the second lodged near his T7 vertebra. The fragments are millimeters from his spinal cord. Reynolds studied the scans, his face going pale. This is impossible. You can't operate this close to... I've done it before, Lara said calmly. Twice, once in Kandahar, once in Mosul. Both patients walked away. Emily stared at her. Under fire? Under fire! Webb entered the room accompanied by another person, a woman in military uniform, full-bird colonel. She looked directly at Lara and saluted. "Dr. Hayes, it's an honor." Lara returned the salute. "Colonel Reeves." Reynolds watched the exchange, utterly lost. The colonel turned to address them all. "For those who don't know, Dr. Hayes served as the lead combat surgeon for SEAL team operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. She operated in conditions most surgeons can't even imagine. Mortar fire, no power, limited supplies. She's one of 3 surgeons in the world with her specific skill set." Reynolds felt his legs weaken. I didn't know." Lara looked at him. "You didn't ask." The words weren't cruel, just factual. They moved into the operating theater. The patient was already prepped. As Lara approached the table, something shifted in her demeanor. The quiet, dismissed doctor from Washington General disappeared entirely. This was someone else, someone forged in war zones. She began the operation with a precision that bordered on supernatural. Every movement deliberate, every incision exact. Reynolds assisted, but even he could see he was watching a master at work. Emily managed the instruments, anticipating Lara's needs before she spoke them. Micro-retractor, suction, magnification to .8. The surgery took 4 hours. At the 2-hour mark, Reynolds' hands began to cramp. Lara never wavered. At 3 hours, Emily's back ached. Lara's focus never broke. At 3 hours and 40 minutes, they reached the final fragment. The most dangerous one, lodged against the spinal cord. One tremor, one slip, and the patient would never walk again. The room fell silent. Lara's breathing slowed. Her hands became perfectly still. Then in one smooth motion, she extracted the fragment. The monitors remained steady. She set down the fragment, closed the incision, and stepped back. "He's stable." The room exhaled collectively. Director Webb entered the observation deck, watching through the glass. He picked up the intercom. "Outstanding work, Doctor. The United States owes you another debt." Lara stripped off her gloves. "Just doing my job, Director." After the surgery, they moved to a debriefing room. Webb addressed them. "What you witnessed today is classified, but I want you to know, Dr. Hayes has saved more American lives than most people will ever know about." He pulled up a file on the screen, Lara's real military record. Reynolds read it, his hands trembling. 53 combat surgeries, 0 losses, Silver Star for Valor, Purple Heart, Presidential Unit Citation. He looked at Lara, who was sitting quietly drinking water, looking exhausted but calm. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" She looked at him, and for the first time he saw past the calm exterior to the weariness underneath. "Because I wanted to be just a doctor again, not a war hero, not a legend, just someone who helps people. I thought if I came to a normal hospital with a normal job, I could finally leave that all behind." Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought I could just be normal." Emily reached over and took her hand. Reynolds felt shame wash over him like a wave. "I'm so sorry." Lara nodded. "I know." Later, as they prepared to leave Langley, Webb pulled Lara aside. "The patient you operated on at Washington General, the gunshot victim with no ID. You remember him?" "Of course. That was Agent Cole's partner. You saved him too, 3 days ago. You've saved the same team twice now and didn't even know it." Lara stared at him. "He was undercover?" "Deep cover. The explosion downtown was an assassination attempt. You saved his life before anyone even knew he was in danger." She sat down heavily. I just saw someone who needed help. That's what makes you who you are, Doctor." Director Webb later stated in a classified briefing, "There are heroes who wear uniforms, and there are heroes who wear surgical gloves. Dr. Hayes proved that courage isn't about recognition. It's about doing the right thing, even when everyone calls you a fraud. When true courage forces an entire system to bow." The following week, the CIA sent an official commendation to Washington General Hospital. The letter, marked classified but approved for limited disclosure, revealed Lara's full service record. The hospital board was stunned. The media got wind of it within hours. Dismissed doctor was actually legendary war surgeon, the Angel of Kandahar, hero hidden in plain sight. Washington General suspended its most decorated doctor. Reynolds became the center of a firestorm. Reporters camped outside his office. Colleagues avoided eye contact. The hospital board called an emergency meeting. He submitted his resignation immediately, but the board refused it. Instead, they asked him to do something harder. Face what he'd done and fix it. 2 weeks later, the Department of Health and Human Services announced that the Hayes Directive, a new policy allowing emergency room doctors and surgeons to act immediately in life-threatening situations without waiting for administrative approval or senior clearance. It was named after Lara. Reynolds was asked to present it at a national medical conference. He stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of doctors and said, "I want to tell you about my greatest failure as a physician." He told them everything, about Lara, about his arrogance, about how he'd valued credentials over capability. "I suspended one of the finest surgeons I've ever seen because she didn't fit my narrow definition of what excellence looked like. I almost cost lives because of my ego." The room was silent. The Hayes Directive exists because we, as a profession, need to remember something fundamental. Our job isn't to protect our reputations. It's to save lives. And sometimes the person best equipped to do that won't look like what we expect. He paused, emotion cracking his voice. "I thought experience came from prestigious institutions, but real experience comes from doing the work, especially when no one's watching. It comes from scars and sleepless nights and impossible choices made under fire." The audience rose in a standing ovation, not for him, for the truth he'd finally spoken. Washington General offered Lara the position of Director of Emergency Medicine. She declined. Emily found her in the hospital chapel, sitting quietly. "You turned it down?" Lara nodded. "I didn't come here to run a department, Emily. I came here to practice medicine, to be in the ER when someone's dying and needs a chance. They're offering you prestige, recognition, everything Reynolds denied you. I know, but those things were never what I wanted." She looked at Emily. "In Kandahar, when a soldier was bleeding out, they didn't care about my titles. They just needed me to save them. That's the medicine I know. That's who I am." Emily sat beside her. "You're going back to the ER? If they'll have me. They'd be fools not to." Lara smiled faintly. "We both know there are plenty of fools in medicine." She returned to work the following Monday. No ceremony, no press conference. Just showed up for her shift. The staff treated her differently now. Some with awe, some with guilt, some with genuine respect. Lara treated them exactly as before, with quiet professionalism. During a staff meeting, a young resident asked her, "Dr. Hayes, knowing what you've been through, how do you come back here and just act normal?" Lara thought for a moment. "Because every patient deserves a doctor who's fully present. If I walk in carrying resentment or pain or ego, I'm not giving them my best. So I leave it at the door." She looked around the room. "All of us have been underestimated. All of us have been doubted. But we're here because we chose to heal people. That's the only thing that matters." Reynolds attended that meeting, sitting in the back. Afterward, he approached her. "I've been going to therapy, trying to understand why I acted the way I did." Lara nodded. "That's good. I think I was threatened by you, by anyone who challenged my sense of control. Most people are threatened by what they don't understand." He looked at her with something like wonder. "How are you not angry?" "I was angry, for years. But anger is exhausting, and I have patience to save." She smiled slightly. "I decided I'd rather be useful than bitter." If you believe that real honor isn't about credentials, but about choosing to save lives even when you're dismissed, type, "I will live with integrity." One doctor, one memory of war, and the legacy of quiet courage. 3 years later, Lara left Washington General, not in disgrace, not in anger, simply because her work there was done. She moved to rural Virginia and opened Med Frontline, a training center teaching combat medical skills to civilians, first responders, and volunteers preparing for disaster relief. The center was simple: converted barn, basic equipment, rigorous training. She didn't advertise her military background, just focused on teaching. "Saving lives doesn't require authority," she told her students. "It requires decision. When someone's bleeding out, they don't care about your resume. They need you to act. Reynolds, now retired, visited the center one afternoon. He watched young trainees learning to control severe bleeding, perform emergency airways, stabilize trauma patients. Lara was in her element, calm and direct, correcting technique with precision. "You're really good at this," Reynolds said during a break. She smiled. "It's what I know. You gave up prestige, salary, recognition to train people in a barn in Virginia. I gave up nothing. I found exactly where I'm supposed to be." They walked outside, looking at the mountains in the distance. "I've been writing a book," Reynolds said, "about leadership in medicine, about the mistakes I made. I wanted your permission to include your story." Lara considered. "Will it help other doctors avoid making the same mistakes?" "That's my hope." "Then yes." He nodded gratefully, then asked, "Do you have any regrets about how it all happened?" Lara was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that people had to nearly die before anyone listened. But I don't regret staying quiet, because if I'd shouted about my credentials, demanded recognition, I would have become the kind of doctor I never wanted to be, one who cared more about reputation than patients." "That's remarkably wise." No, it's remarkably tired." She smiled sadly. "I spent years in war zones watching people die because help came too late or not at all. I couldn't save them all, but I could save the ones in front of me. That became my purpose. It still is." At the front of the training center stood a wooden memorial board, carved into it, "In memory of those who healed before they were believed." Below that, names of medics, nurses, and doctors who died in combat or were dismissed despite their skill. Lara added names to it every year. Reynolds read the inscription, felt tears sting his eyes. "This is beautiful. It's necessary, because the world forgets quiet heroes." That evening, as the sun set over the Virginia hills, Lara stood alone in the training bay. She washed her hands slowly, methodically, the way she'd done thousands of times before. On her wrist, faintly visible, was an old scar. Shrapnel wound from Kandahar, a reminder of where she'd been, what she'd survived. She traced it absently, remembering the faces of soldiers she'd saved, and the ones she couldn't. In the distance, a siren wailed. Ambulance heading somewhere. Someone in crisis. Someone needing help. She closed her eyes and whispered, "They'll be okay. Someone will be there." The wind carried her words away, mixing with the fading siren, and somewhere in the dusk, a whisper echoed back, "We need her now." The surgical glove rested on the table beside her, faded seal medic badge, symbols of silent dedication. Because true heroes don't need applause. They just need someone to save. If you believe courage still lives in everyday heroes, subscribe to The Veteran Story. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.